Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the Phyrexia All Will Be One Prerelease that I attended recently at Emerald Nights in Burbank, California, right here. This is the latest set for Magic the Gathering, and this one takes us back to Mirrodin, now called Phyrexia. And we can see that this is a pre-release box. We have a picture of Elish Norn there and all of her Phyrexian monstrosities. Very gross and freaky. When you open up this box, this kind of pops open like this. You have some Phyrexian Planeswalker symbols. And then the cardboard packaging here is again used as a way to produce additional counters that you can use here. So I think that these can be used for poison counters, these can be used for planeswalker counters, and then these two can be used as tokens, generic tokens, in case you need to generate any in the set. Inside you get your deck box, and your deck box has this symbol again and more Elish Norn artwork on the back. And when you pop this thing open, you get all of these contents. You have a spin down life counter. I hear that some of these might have the dice written with the numbers in Phyrexian, but I just got a standard black one here. And then inside, you'll also get one of these pre-release deck instructions. So it gives you the quick rundown on how to generally build a pre-release deck should you not have any experience doing so. And so there's that here. This says 17 lands, and that's the standard. You'll see why I went down to 16 lands later. And then on the back, you get a little guide to the 9 spheres of New Phyrexia. And so it's just a little bit of flavor. I do wish that there was a little bit more put into this so that you can really get a better experience of New Phyrexia when you are at pre-release. But this is the standard for Wizards of the Coast these days. And then you get a promo card, in which case I got a promo Darkslick Shores. It's a standard land, but it'll be a pretty useful one in general for those who are playing. And then you also get a code that you can use for Magic Arena. I've already redeemed this, so there's no reason for you to try to redeem this one, but I probably will have some more in the future that if you are lucky enough to see it, you can redeem it as well. And so there's these two in the standard packaging. And then I had 6 packs of Phyrexia All Will Be One inside here, draft packs, and then I opened them up and these are the cards that I got. So here is everything that I opened all laid out. I got 1 mythic rare in the Phyrexian Vindicator over here, and then several other rares, as you'll see, just scattered around here. White had another pair of rares in the Strelv's Hive and the Kemikaw Enduring. And then I got a rare in black and white with Kaya Intangible Slayer over there. And then just a handful of other cards here. As you can just see from looking at these cards, black and the white had the most number of cards. And they also had a lot of synergy in that most of these cards in both of these decks, especially in black, were toxic cards. And so they were interested in putting poison counters on my opponent. There was a bit of proliferate in black as well to synergize with that. And green and red were really short on cards in general, and the blue didn't have a lot of power. And so it was really apparent to me from the get-go that I would be playing some kind of black and white deck. And then I was taking a look at the cards, and I saw that the toxic theme and the proliferate theme also extended into green a bit. There's a bit of proliferate in blue as well, but I wasn't as concerned about that because that seemed to be more interested in oil. There wasn't a lot of toxic to support this theme that I had working here. And so I didn't bother with any of the cards here that didn't have toxic or proliferate or really supported that kind of game plan, except general support cards like the removal spells. And so I took out red and blue and ignored those entirely, along with the Serum Core Chimera, which is a strong card, but really didn't fit my game plan. And then took out the Chartforger as a result, and then just focused on white, black, and green. And then I also had the Kaya in black and white, as well as the Vivisection Evangelist. And then all of these artifacts that I could also look at as potential cards to use. And so with all of that, I decided to build a black and white deck, and looking at what was available to me, my curve could have been really, really low. And so I thought maybe that I would make a bit more of an aggressive deck, which did mean that I needed to look into cutting some of the more expensive cards like Kaya, as even though that she was in color, she cost 7 mana, and if my curve is primarily 2-drops, for example, as you can see there are a ton of them here, then I probably wouldn't be using her, nor would I be using the Phyrexian Vindicator, because The white is going to be the second color, not the primary color. And with 4 white mana symbols, there's no way I'm going to be able to cast that until like turn 5 or 7 anyways, because it's going to be hard for me to get all 4 planes together. And so that was always going to be out. Kemba, for example, would also be out. I don't have a lot of equipment in my card pool here, and so that wasn't going to get played either. But these were going to be the core colors probably, and then I would consider splashing green because I had a couple of Heromorphic Expanses here. And so I would have to look carefully through because I'm probably going to end up with a 16 land deck here with all the 2-drops that I'm going to be running and none of the expensive cards. And so I needed to really be thoughtful about which green cards would benefit my plan the most. And so that was everything that I looked at. And as you can see, there are some of the cool cards here. I got a bunch of tokens here, and that's great because I ended up needing a handful of those. And then the lands are really cool because they're all full art, and I got 1 foil planes here in addition to these crazy looking Phyrexian lands here too. And so that was also really cool to see as well. So I'll show you in my deck next. So this is the deck that I built. It is extremely aggressive. As you can see, it's primarily in the 2-drops. I didn't even use the vast majority of the rares that were in these colors, specifically because I noticed that I just had an aggressive poison plan here. So I have so many 2-drops. Most of them can put a poison counter on my opponent. And then I have ways of getting poison counters through even when the board stalls down. And so the Blightbelly Rats, when they die, they proliferate. That can increase the poison counters on my opponent. The Pestilent Siphoners can get in through the air and get additional poison counters through, as well as a Flensing Raptor. And then I have ways of drawing more cards should I need to. The Chittering Skittling lets me kill my own creatures once my opponent is corrupted, so that I can get more cards if any of these start being weaker here. And I can just be more aggressive in general with the Incisor Gliders. If I can get those first 3 poison counters through, this will help my other creatures go through or at least trade. And so that's a plus. The Slaughter Singer also does the same thing as the Incisor Gliders, except you don't need to already have corruption for it to do its thing. It's also just a good body for poisoning as well. And then I have the Basilica Skull Bomb here, which I put in the last minute because I noticed that I was short 1 card, because I can sacrifice it to give a creature flying and +2/+2, and so that'll help one of these other toxic creatures get in through the air. The same reason why I put the Adaptive Spore Singer in the end. I splashed that in because it can proliferate, which can finish my opponent off, or it can give a creature +2/+2 in Vigilance, which will help me swing through with one of these smaller creatures if I need to. I have a bit of removal here in the Planar Disruptions and the Whisper of the Duras, which also can proliferate, which means that I can also use it to get that final poison counter on to win, as well as Complete Devotion, which will help one of my creatures survive combat. And then it'll also draw me a card because the vast majority of my creatures are also toxic. The creatures that aren't directly supporting the toxic plan are still pretty good here, because we have, for example, the Vivisection Evangelist, which will act as a 2-for-1 if my opponent is corrupted. And so I just can bring this in as an additional piece of removal on top of the Planar Disruptions. And then the Gulping Scap Trap has a potential to proliferate twice, which is potentially up to 2 more poison counters. So I need to get that first poison counter on, which is why I filled this deck up with 2-drops. I had other cards that could have fit in this space as well, but I think that getting the first poison counter on and then just getting additional poison counters through proliferating or through getting in through the air would help. In addition, I have Skrelv's Hive, which just creates a whole bunch of mites. So as long as I have time, I can go wide and then finish my opponent off with a big swing of these little mites. In addition to that, if my opponent is corrupted, it'll also help me buy a little time because all my creatures will have lifelink as well. And then I splashed green for the Slaughter Singer, which is great, as well as the Vital Spawning. And then I put in the Spore Singer at the end. The Vital Spawning is great because it's 2 3/3s basically, because this has flashback as long as my opponent is corrupted. And again, my deck is really designed to corrupt my opponent. And so there's that. And the final piece of this puzzle that I think is pretty cool is the Scheming Aspirant, which can drain my opponent for 2 every time I proliferate. And I have several ways to proliferate in this deck. And so this is a kind of a 2-for-1 in the sense that I can drain my opponent. It's mostly just to keep me alive, but I can get my opponent's life total down pretty low because of the draining ability. And so it's also possible that I can just go wide and swing with all my little guys and then try to beat my opponent before they can get up and going. So that's how I ended up putting this deck together. As you can see, I did cut a lot of green cards that could have also fit in this deck because I think white, green, and black are all playing on this toxic theme pretty well together. But that is everything here. In addition, we have the 2 Terramorphic Expanses to help me get to the green that I need here. I also have 2 forests in this deck that are not pictured here, as well as 7 swamps and 5 plains to get everything together here. And because of the Terramorphic Expanses, I felt a little bit more comfortable being able to splash the green cards in. And so that is the deck. So at Emerald Knights, they run a 3-match tournament, and there is a flat prize structure, so everybody gets 2 set boosters regardless of what your final score is at the end. And so that's what I got here as a bonus for playing in the pre-release. And then I will explain some of the games that I played. In the first match, I was up against a white, black, and green deck, very much like my own, another toxic deck, but my deck was just faster. In the first game, I got on the floor with toxic really fast and then took my opponent out in, it looks like, 6 turns, with getting poison counters on my opponent and then being able to get even more poison counters, corrupting my opponent, playing a Vivisection Evangelist to knock out his defense in the air, and then finishing my opponent off with Toxic in the air. And that was a really fast game. The second game was a lot more even. My opponent was actually able to build a board, and this one I finished my opponent off with poison counters again, but this time I had to proliferate because the boards actually stalled out a little and I couldn't get as well through in the air. And so I finished my opponent off with Proliferate using the Whisper of the Dross to get that last poison counter on my opponent. And that was 2 really fast games in a row. We played a third game for fun, and that third game I just went off again on the aggressive track and took my opponent out within 5 turns as well. And so that was a really, really fast run. My opponent's deck stumbled a little, and that was my deck working exactly the way that I had hoped that it would. Moving on to my second match, I was up against a player playing black and red, and they were a bit on the oil aggro plan. In the first game, I had to mulligan my 1-lander, and then I kept a 2-lander. And we were actually pretty even off. I had my opponent all the way up to 8 poison counters, but then they were able to build a bit of a defense and remove my flyers, and so I couldn't get through. Then they drew their Dragon Equipment card, which basically creates a 4/4 Flying Haster, and I just didn't have the blockers at that point, especially with my opponent having wiped out my forces with removal and me having drawn even more lands, that my opponent finished me off pretty quickly at the end there. The second game was a lot closer, and in this one I ended up winning by poison counters again, and I got a lot of value off the Skrell's Hive, giving me a bit of life here and there to keep me in the game. Because of the life gain that I had, my opponent just needed 1 more point of damage somewhere, and they would have been able to finish me off, but because they couldn't get that last point of damage somewhere, I was able to finish them off with poison counters for the win. So in the final game, I opened with a mulligan because the first hand only had 1 land in it, and the second hand had a Terramorphic Expanse, as well as 3 black cards and then 3 white cards. And so I figured, all right, the white cards are a bit more expensive. Let me take the black cards because I know I have more black cards in my deck. So I kept the 6-card hand and then cracked the Terramorphic Expanse for a swamp, hoping that I would draw the plains later, and then knowing that I'd draw more black cards than anything else. I drew more swamps, and I drew a forest, but I didn't draw any one of my other plains. However, I drew mostly white cards, and so my opponent was beating me down, and I was eventually getting a hand of unplayable cards because the random number god decided that he would feed me all of my white cards that were in my deck. And so I ended up unable to play anything really, and eventually just chumping to my opponent, who just wore me out with a lot of aggressive creatures. I ended up with just 4 lands at the end of the game, none of them being white, and 6 white cards in my hands, which I think I had 7 white cards in the deck. And so that was just really unlucky running, bad running, and I lost 1-2 in that match. In the final match, I played against a fellow black and white deck. In the first game, I kept the 1-lander again with a Terramorphic Expanse, but the problem is I just didn't draw any more lands, and I thought, okay, I just need to draw 1 more land, and you know, I could play all these black cards, and eventually I was able to draw another land, but I actually discarded the hand size twice, and by that point my opponent was already swinging at me and took me down to dead very quickly, and so that was over in a hurry. In the second match, I actually had an incredible force arrayed. I had all the creatures going out, I had Toxic everywhere, I was going to swing for an immense amount of damage, and then my opponent played White Sun's Twilight, which is a spell where if you pay over 5, it destroys all the creatures on the board except for the 5 mites that it creates. And so my opponent wiped out my board entirely and then had 5 mites and was swinging at me to get poison counters on me, and then that was really brutal. I was able to rebuild, but by the time I rebuilt, my opponent played another White Sun's Twilight, because they had 2 in their deck, as well as 2 Black Sun's Twilights, and so my opponent removed my board again as I was able to stabilize and then finish me off with mites, and that was just brutal. And so this was just like 2 back-to-back like brutal losses to my opponent. And so I went 1 and 2 in my matches for Phyrexia All Be One. I still had a good time. I thought that the deck that I built, the aggressive 16 land, mostly 2-drop poison deck, was actually probably the best deck that I could have built. And I had fun trying to run it, and I am very much looking forward to seeing how this plays in draft. I should also note that there was a card divider here with the Planeswalker symbol. And then the pre-release in general was kind of the same as pretty much every pre-release for a very long time. There isn't a lot to the experience that makes me feel like we're in Phyrexia, except for the actual game playing sealed itself. And that was cool. And the art and the cards definitely evoked the theme. But I do wish that the experience had just a little bit more that really helped you feel the world of Phyrexia in it. And I'm not saying that Emerald Knights needs to like sponsor some sort of costume event or anything like that. I just felt like it would have been nice for Wizards to create some sort of mechanical element to the experience of playing in Phyrexia All Will Be One that gave us a doorway into understanding this world of New Phyrexia as we experience it. And so people who come to this pre-release not having, read all of the stories that are online could learn a bit more and have an understanding of what kind of world that this set is trying to evoke beyond just the cards and the text on the cards, which we're going to be too busy to read anyway. So I think something more than just this little 9 spheres of New Phyrexia thing would have been helpful. And if it was mechanical or gameplay, or maybe there's like a checklist to completion or some way of aligning yourself with the rebels or the Mirren Resistance, maybe that would have maybe helped this feel a bit more like a introduction to the set. But again, Wizards really hasn't been doing much to help the pre-release feel more than just a sealed deck tournament with a couple extras. And so this is pretty par for course, and I felt like the only thing that helped this set really stand out is just the cards and the mechanics and the gameplay of the set when you are playing the cards against each other. And so, as usual, I think that this could have been a better experience, but I had fun. Let me know how your pre-release experience for Phyrexia All Will Be One went in the comments below. If you found this video enjoyable, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.